Morning, everyone. Okay, we're just gonna get started. Uh, so last week this is where we ended up. Today we're gonna try to finish everything off on the desk here. Maybe we'll be able to finish the books and the clock as well. And then hopefully the next session we'll get into materials, camera angle, and a little bit of animation, perhaps. But let's jump right in. So I'm just gonna focus on the more complicated models first. We're gonna do the keyboard, the speaker, but let's go to keyboard. Hopefully you caught up on the last recording if you are falling behind. But let's go ahead and add that keyboard first. Okay, I'm just gonna move my 3D cursor onto the desk. That's shift right click, and let me just enable my hotkeys here. So it's shift right click, and then just click anywhere on this surface, somewhere in the middle, right in front of this monitor. And then I'm gonna hit shift A, plane, and then you'll get that plane. We're gonna decrease the size in edit mode, so I'm hitting tab and just making it smaller. And then I'm just gonna increase it on the X axis. I will move the reference image a little bit closer just so it's easier to see that. Size looks a little bit bigger than the image, but we'll just keep it like this. I like this size now. And then we will extrude that. So E. So the difference between object mode and edit mode, I kind of differentiate that based on the scale value. So just for demonstration purposes, if I had to add a plane, and right now the scale is 1:1:1, if I decrease that, it decreases uniformly here, XYZ. But then if I had to change 1, that makes the X value inconsistent with Y and Z. And then when you start, let's say, rounding these corners, you'll get a skewed rounded corner. So I usually want to just do everything in edit mode, but sometimes if it's just a perfect square, then it doesn't really matter because the XYZ value are the same. So in this case, if I had to tweak the corners, I still get perfect corners here. But if it's skewed on one axis, then I would want to do that in edit mode. Another thing is, let's say you want to keep the origin point where it is. So I'll just add that plane back. I want to keep this origin point here, and maybe I want to create 2 table legs on the left and right. So let's say this is the tabletop, and then I'm just gonna duplicate that. And if I'm using the mirror modifier, for example, I want to keep the origin point here so that when I tweak, so you'll notice that in edit mode, the origin point is the same. So I'm just moving the model in edit mode. But if I did that in object mode, let's go back. So if I did this in object mode, sorry. Origin point moves around with it, which means the mirror modifiers, there's no point in adding that. So because that is based on the origin point. So if I selected everything in edit mode, moved it away, then it starts applying that modifier. So that's just two cases that I can think of off the top of my head, but there are other use cases. But most of the time it's better to just go into edit mode and start tweaking things. Okay, so from this point, let's round the edges. So this keyboard has a more rounded top than the bottom. So we're just gonna do that separately. I'm gonna select the top. And before I do, I'm just gonna make sure scale value is the same. It's not. So if this is off, just do Control A and you want to reapply the scale. Okay, and then in edit mode, let's do bevel, Control B, and then bevel the top about this much. I'm gonna make 3 cuts. And then we can also do the bottom. So let's, if you wanted to isolate the view, it's slash on your numpad. And then let's round that a little bit less. And I could have done the corners first. That would have been easier because you have less edges to select. But I've done the top and bottom first. So in this case, just to quickly select all these edges, you can either do Alt and click on one of these, or you can do click, like select the top one here, and then if you do Control click, Blender will try to select the edges along that path. But in my case, I'll just do Alt Shift. Now that we've selected one, we want to add it to our selection. So Alt Shift, and then just keep selecting these edges. Control B, and let's round it by this much. And then at the end, we just want to shade smooth. Okay, so for the keys itself, I kept so it's very stylized. You'll notice it's not the same as a real keyboard. There's 4 rows of keys. The top 2 are identical, so there's just how many are there? 9 keys on the top 2 rows, and then the bottom 2, I wanted to make some resemblance to the physical keyboard we have. So you'll notice the shift key is a little bit longer, like the far left key here, far right key, and then the 4th row is Control, maybe Option or Alt, the space bar. So it's stylized, but I did want some resemblance. So let's just go ahead and add, we're gonna use the array modifier for this. So let's just add 1 key for now. I'm just gonna select the top face of this keyboard. And I could have done shift right click to move the cursor, but I'm just gonna do Shift S and then cursor to selected. So when you do that, it's just gonna find the middle point of that selected face and then place the cursor there. Okay, let's exit edit mode. We're gonna create the keys on a separate object. So Shift A, let's do cube, and we'll just decrease it in size until we reach about this scale. And I'm just gonna go to top view. That's the 7 on your numpad, so we get a better idea of how big this is. And I'm just gonna move this to the top left here. And I don't want it to go through the corner, so somewhere where it just sits on the edge, but not into the rounded corner like this. And then we'll have to adjust the scale as we go. For now, let's apply the array modifier. So go to your modifiers panel. This is the wrench icon. And just hit array. And when you apply that, you can't really tell if it's two objects because they spawn it right next to each other. But if you did 1.1 in the X factor, then it separates it by 0.1. So I believe I had 9 keys. We're just gonna create 9 counts here. 9. And you'll notice it doesn't fully go to the edge. We could adjust the space like so, but let's do both. Let's do 1.2 for the X factor, and then we're also going to change the scale on this. And in order to do this, you might want to go back to like an angled view. In top view, going into edit mode, you can't. Oh, you can see. Okay, so if you're able to see something in edit mode, you can stay in that view. Otherwise, I'm just gonna go to the angled view, and we're just gonna increase the scale of this one. So you're not adjusting in terms of selection. You're only selecting this first one, and you're changing that. And based on that one model, you're changing the rest because you're using the array modifier. So I'm just gonna scale that up a little bit so it reaches the right side. And again, you don't want it bleeding into the rounded corner there. So you'll notice in this case it kind of is, but no biggie if it does. We can adjust that later. So we have 9 keys. Let's extrude it up. So with that first one selected, hit E and just extrude it up like so. And then let's add one more array modifier because we want 4 rows of keys going downwards. So I'm just gonna add one more. And what this will do is it'll just add on top of what we've created and apply the array modifier. We don't want it going against the X, we want it going against the Y. So change the X to 0 and then Y to 1.2. You might want it to be minus 1.2, so it goes the other way. And I'm keeping it 1.2 because we had the X factor in the first one to be 1.2, and I just like the spacing to be even. So let's make 4 counts like this. So we have 4 rows of keys. I do want to center it a little bit. I'm noticing that it's closer to the bottom edge than the top, so I'm just gonna move it up a little bit. Okay, now we're gonna round these corners. So we're gonna select these 4 corners first. So these 4. And based on the keyboard, just looking at how round it is, let's do Control B, round it by this much, and then select the top view, round that a little bit, and make sure you don't overlap the vertices here. So as at a certain point, these top corners, they merge into one, and you don't want that to happen. You want it to be separated like so. Okay, and then I'm just gonna shade smooth in object mode, and then let's toggle on auto smooth in normals. So that's this triangle icon, auto smooth. And I'm gonna get rid of these artifacts here, so I'm just gonna increase this to 60. Okay, let's go back to the modifier panel. I'm looking at this now, and it seems a bit too, like the keys seem too further apart. So I'm just gonna go back into edit mode, and let's decrease the number to 1.1 instead. Same with this one, minus 1.1. And then if you haven't already, select this one. You can also press A and it'll select everything. I'm just gonna scale that up. And then just make sure it's centered again. I think it's centered. And then I'm just gonna push it down into the keyboard slightly, like so. And now we're gonna make those custom tweaks to the keys. So the first two rows, they're gonna stay the same. We'll tweak the third row first, the far left and the far right key. So before we do that, we wanna apply this array modifier so we can start tweaking the keys, the individual keys. So you can do that by hitting this arrow. There will be an apply button here. It's grayed out because we're in edit mode, so we just want to exit edit mode, go into object mode, and then hit apply. And once you've done that, it applies to the first row. So that was the first modifier, but we're gonna have to do it for all the keys. So you can either do apply, or in my case I use Control A, which is the hotkey that's listed on the right. And you have all of them kind of applied. So now you can select them individually, like so. And let's go to the top view. We're gonna have to delete one key to make the shift longer. So let's select this one here. And we wanna go to wireframe mode because we won't be able to select the bottom face. So just go to wireframe. And as you can see, it's not selecting the side or the bottom. So we're gonna select this key in wireframe mode. Also this one here. And if you're having a hard time selecting these, just zoom in, create that selection box, and then zoom in, select that one too. And we're gonna delete it. That is X verticals. And now we're just gonna select these two edges. So for the left key, we're gonna select the right side. For the right side, we're selecting the left, and we're just gonna push them so it's flush to the key on the top here. So let's select this one. And I'm in select mode I'm in face mode, face select mode right now, just because I find that easier to select things. Whereas if I had vertices, I would have to select this and include the edge as well, like so. But if I had face, you just need to include the dot in the middle of each face. So just need to go up to here and then move that over. I want to constrain it against X, so GX, and then just kind of eyeball it to this point here. And if you want some fine tuning, make sure you hit shift while you're moving it. And then same for the right, shift key here, GX, and I'm just gonna move it over, align it to the top key there, top and bottom key. Okay, and that's done. The bottom one we have, the bottom where we have 5 keys. So we're gonna have to delete a few here. 2 on left, 2 on the right. So let's delete these 2 and these 2 here. Before we do anything, let's change the length of this spacebar first. So select this key, and in this case we have it set, we're selecting the whole object, so we just need to scale it on the X. Actually that won't work because the rounded corners, they're gonna get skewed, so we're just gonna move it manually again. So select the right side, GX. I will move it towards this, so it's gonna occupy 3 keys here. Same thing with the left side, and it's looking a little bit short still, so maybe we'll extend it so it goes to the center of this key here. Like this. Okay, so for this control key, we're gonna select everything on the left of this key. So including this key as well. So include that one, include the faces on the left, and then just push that a little bit to the left. And I'm just trying to make this spacing even with the other keys here. And it's a little bit off. You can see the center of this key is not center with this space, but that's fine. Let's do the same with the left side here. Shouldn't matter too much because we're gonna have the camera's gonna be zoomed out, so you won't be able to see if there's any inconsistencies within the keys. Okay, let's go back to solid mode, and we have your keys. And then from here you can tweak it a little bit. If I had to make a tweak, I would probably make the keys rounder on the top. So one thing Adam mentioned in the Discord, he said that before applying modifiers, it's nice to have a backup. And in this case, I could have done that because once you apply the array, it's hard to go back. We've made a lot of changes, and to undo that, we would have to do Control Z, undo all the changes that we've made. We didn't use the bevel modifier this time, we just beveled it manually. So if I had to round this a little bit further, what I do is go to front view and then wireframe, and I'll just select all those faces that consist or make up that rounded corner, and I can do Control Z, make it a little bit rounder. But this method is a little bit of a hack. You're not rounding it perfectly. As you can see, it's getting skewed. But in this case, we're kind of zoomed out. We don't really care as much. So I'm just gonna revert that change. I do want to push it down a little bit, so like this, and then we should have a complete keyboard model. Okay, let's move on to the speaker. We're gonna create one first and then duplicate it. Actually, let's use the mirror modifier because just for the purpose of learning, we want to create the speaker so the origin point is at centered to this monitor. So we have one on the left and the right of the monitor. So select this monitor stand, and then let's move the 3D cursor to it. We're not going to do that manually. We're going to hit Shift S, cursor to selected, and that's going to center it to that stand. And then from there, let's add a cube, scale it down, and we're going to push it up. Oh, by the way, I did notice that the keyboard was not sitting on top of the desk, so let's just move that quickly. I'm just selecting everything on the keys and then going to front view and pushing it down so it touches the desk. And then from here, the speaker is a little bit higher in height than width, so let's do the same thing. I'm just gonna go to edit mode and let's tweak the X axis, so SX, and then just make it a little bit narrow. Depth is a little too deep, so we're gonna tweak that as well. SY, so scale it along the Y axis, and we can totally isolate this view. Hit the / key on the numpad. Okay, I am happy with this, maybe a little bit higher. And then let's go back to this view, and then inside edit mode, I want to move it over to the left so that the origin point stays here. And I did move it up, or move it down a little bit, so I'm just gonna move it up, have it sit on the desk. And just comparing with the reference image, it is along the same height as the pod, so I think we're good with the size. And then from here, let's apply the mirror modifier. So now it's mirrored. And we are going to create that speaker bit there. So the center circle. What I'm gonna do is we're gonna make some cuts. Let's make, I think this is how I did it. Let's do 6 cuts. So 6 cuts on the horizontal axis. So that's Control R if you forgot the hotkey. That's short for loop cuts. And then we're gonna create 3 vertically. And we're gonna try using a new tool this time. So I'm gonna select the front 16 faces here, excluding the second row from the top, and then just the 4 rows, including the second to the 5th. And then if you do right click, loop tools bridge. Sorry, loop to circle. Actually, maybe we should, I believe it's just these four here. Yeah, then it'll create a circle. I believe you have to enable loop tools. So if you don't have that option on the top, go to edit, preferences, and you might not see my preference window. So let me just capture my display. Okay, hopefully you can see that. So once you have that preference window open, go to add-ons. And if you search for loop tools or just loop, you'll find this mesh loop tools, and you just need to hit that checkbox. So hitting that checkbox, going back to Blender, you'll notice it's there. So let's go to loop tools, circle, and it is a little bit small in size, so I'm just gonna scale it. It's still a little bit small. Let's do this. We're gonna have to move these two cuts here on the top bottom of that. So go to edge select, which is number 2 on your keyboard, and then hit Alt and click on this top one. And then I'm gonna do Alt Shift, select the bottom one here, and we're just gonna push it away from the circle. So S, Z, and we're just gonna push that evenly. Actually, that might not be the best way to do it. So later on, we're gonna have to bevel the corners here, and we want enough room away from these edges so we can bevel it. So let's just Control Z that back. And this one will have to do some tweaking. Okay, so select this bottom edge here. So Alt, left click, and let's just dissolve those edges. So if you right click on that, it's the 4th option from the bottom, and it'll just remove that edge for us, that loop cut. And then we're just gonna go to wireframe mode, go to front view, and I'm doing face select, which is number 3, and I'm just gonna select these faces in the center, and I'm gonna push this down. Gonna push this down to the center of the height of the speaker. And when you're doing that, make sure you're only selecting these here. Sometimes I select faces that are on the back and I make a weird model. But let's just go back to solid mode. And then now we can select the bottom and top face. So that's Alt, left mouse click, and then just push that up, SZ. And if you're not getting the same type of tweak like this, there might be an issue with your pivot point. So this is that pivot point tool. You can change how you're editing your selection. The same thing is period on your keyboard, and then you'll get this pie wheel. And you have to select medium point. If you have 3D cursor selected and you're tweaking that, then it's gonna tweak based on this cursor, which is not what we want. We want to do medium point, SZ, and then just move that away from the circle. Okay, let's select these 4 faces, And let's scale that. And again, I don't want it to be sitting too close to these left and right edges. Let's apply the bevel modifier actually, which will give us a better idea of what it will look. So go to object mode, hit add modifier, bevel. And if you don't have the scale uniform like me, then you'll have to do Control A scale. Actually, we will do that regardless. I don't think it's being applied correctly. So let's just do Shift A scale, change that to 1. And .02. It might look the same as 1. So it doesn't really matter if you change that for this model itself. And then just increase the segment. And then if we go to edit mode, you'll notice the bevel only ends up to this circle. Because we've created another face, it's just taking this edge and whatever vertice is closest to it, that's what it's beveling against. So if you make this face smaller, you'll notice you have a little bit more room. And I'm just gonna make it smaller until that bevel modifier doesn't change. And then with the 4 faces selected, let's inset it. So hit I. And just going back to this reference, we have this little edge that protrudes out, and then the center insets goes into the speaker, but then this little round bit, it kind of sticks out again. So we're gonna do the same thing. This is the edge that we're gonna be extruding out, but let's go ahead and inset the face inside, and then do G to move it inside a little bit, Y. And then if you've got to this point, let's apply the subdivision surface modifier. And then you'll notice it creates a few more loop cuts, or there'll be more geometry. That's the characteristic of this modifier. And then let's just increase the viewport subdivision to 2 or 3. I think 2 is okay. We do want to shade smooth, so if you go to object mode, shade smooth, and we have that little dent in the speaker. Let's go ahead and extrude this out. So what I'm doing is going to face select, which is 3, or this key here, and then Alt, and just selecting this loop here. And you also, when you're doing that, you want to make sure you're at the edge and selecting it. If you go to the center, Blender will have a hard time knowing which face you're selecting. So I always go against the edge that I want to select as a loop. So once you've done that, press E, extrude it out. And we're getting some weird artifacts here. Let me see if I can fix that. Okay, so when you're in the bevel modifier, let's change the geometry. Go into geometry and then the outer to arc. That makes it a little bit smoother, but we're still not there yet. We're gonna have to change. Right now we have 2 big of a bevel, so that's why this is happening here. We could either change this to a smaller bevel, and it should help a little bit, but then we also lose some of the bevel on the outside. So what I want to do is select the inside. So you're gonna, right now it's kind of hard to see because we have the subdivision modifier select on, but if you go to wireframe and do the same alt click on the edge, you'll be able to select the inside loop there. And I'm just gonna scale that down a little bit. Maybe just slightly, and then let's try changing the bevel amount to a smaller number. So what I'm trying to do is just increasing the width of this loop here, like the size of, or the width of it. Maybe scale the outer loop a little. But keep in mind when you're doing this, you're losing some bevel on the outside of the speaker, because once you do that, now the corner has less room to bevel against. So just keep that in mind. Just gonna tweak it slightly. Let's see what happens when I do this. Okay, maybe we should just remove the bevel modifier entirely. Just remove this one, the second one here. And then we're gonna bevel the corners manually. I think that'll be better. But what I just did, I forgot to explain these tools here. So this, if you hover over, you'll see that there's little two tooltips that appear, but you're basically toggling on and off the visibility of this third icon is the viewport. So if you toggle this off, you're toggling off the modifier in your canvas or in your viewport, but in the final render you'll still see that modifier applied. If you wanted to do just toggle off the render, then you can click on that last icon here. I don't use these as much, but it's just nice to have if you're into that. Okay, and then we removed the bevel modifier, so we're just gonna select these four corners. And I'm gonna do Control B. Okay, now it's getting weird because I believe, yeah, that's a subdivision happening. Okay, we're not going to use this method either. Just Control Z if you've done that already. Let's select the bottom two edges here. So the issue I'm having right now is it's too rounded around the edge of the speaker. So if I move these two edges closer to the edge, you'll notice that it gets a bit sharper along the top, and we'd want to do that for the left and right and the front and back as well. So what you could do is select loop cut on the left and right here. So if you add Control R, loop cut here, it's not going to be a perfect straight line because we have this speaker. Let's actually decrease the size of this circle here. So just select these four 4 faces in the center. And you'll want to do that in wireframe mode. It's going to be hard to select here. And then just hit Control plus until you are able to select this outside face here. Like so. And let's just scale that down a little bit. And then let's go back to selecting this edge. So that's Alt, click S, and I want to make this a straight line. And I don't know if you remember, but we used the scale tool to make this a straight line. So if we just do S, and I want to do it against the X axis, hit 0 on your numpad, and you'll get a straight line. Same thing with this side, SX0. So it's looking a little better. And you'll notice it's not perfectly round because we haven't done the front and back. So we're just gonna do that too. Go to top view, or you can just manually go over, and let's create 2 loop cuts here from the top. And then instantly you'll notice a big difference. I am going to make this closer to the edges, so SY. So if you want a perfect rounded corner, you just want these 3 edges to be the same length. In my case, I think it's okay if we have it slightly differently. And I want it slightly more rounded. So if you want to do the same, just move your edges further away from the corner. And then you'll notice that it becomes a little bit more rounded. Same with this edge here. This one is a little bit tricky because you have the speaker, but I have a bit more room, so I'm just gonna move it inwards. And you're just tweaking these 2 edges and tweaking the distance between the corners here. So that's another way to bevel. We've applied the subdivision modifier and then just created loop cuts and tweak the distance between the corner and that loop cut. Okay, we're gonna move on. I think we spent too much time on beveling. Let's select these 4 faces in the center. I can see a little bit of it, so I'm able to select it, but if you're not able to, just go to wireframe mode. Select these 4 faces, and I'm going to extrude that out like so, just a little bit. Also, I want to make it smaller, and if you want to tweak that, go ahead and tweak the size or how far it comes out, but for now I'm happy with this. Let me just see if I can. Okay, I do want to make this edge sharper. Right now it's too rounded. That's because subdivision is creating a curve between this. So this and this. You won't be able to see it, but this and this. They're just taking the existing edges and creating a curve. So what you want to do is create another curve and just make that closer to the edge. So what I did is I just made a loop cut here in the center of this where it comes out, and then just moving it closer to the speaker itself, and then you'll get a sharper edge like so. Okay, so for now, let's move on. I think this is good enough. If you wanted to tweak it later, feel free to do it. But we're gonna move on. Let's go to the pencil case and these two. I believe I made it to be a highlighter and a pencil. So we're gonna create this body first, which should be pretty easy. I'm just gonna move my 3D cursor by doing Shift right mouse click. Shift A, cylinder. Let's decrease the vertices to something low. We're not gonna need that detail. And then just decrease the pencil case down. Compare it with the speaker, I think it's pretty similar in size, so that could be a good reference. I'm gonna make it smaller. And just make sure it's sitting on top of the desk. And we do want to make that hole in the center, so Alt tab into edit mode, select the top face, inset I, and then you can press E to extrude down. And I want to see how deep this will go, so let's go to side view, which is 3, numpad 3, wireframe view, and what I want to do is just make sure that the edges are all identical in width. So let's just go down. I'm just gonna make sure these edges are identical in distance. Okay, so go back to solid mode. And I'm going to shade smooth first. So go to object mode, shade smooth. And then we want to go to object data properties, auto smooth, 60. And this one we're just going to manually bevel again. So in edit mode, edge select, which is number 2. And I'm just going to select these 2 loops here. And let's do Control B, bevel it down, and we have a nice pencil case. Does anyone want to take a break? Seems like Adam, Grace, you're good. If you're watching live on Twitch, we do have a Discord. This is a Discord workshop, so I'm just gonna put the link on the bottom of the screen. So that link will take you to the Discord. But it seems like everyone's good to go. So we're gonna skip the break today. Let's go ahead and create the highlighter first. And this is just a simple cylinder rounding the top and then just extruding this bit here. So let's go ahead and do that. I want to create it so it's centered to this pencil case first. So let's do, with the pencil case selected, origin point should be in the center already. Let's do Shift S, cursor to selected. And then I'm just gonna add a cylinder. You could keep it 12 verticals, doesn't really matter. Let's scale it down to a thickness that you're you're comfortable with, and then I'm just gonna extrude or increase it in height, so that's SZ, and just making it stick out a little bit. I do want to make sure that it's not going inside here, so I'm gonna switch to wireframe view, and then just making sure that it doesn't. I think that looks about right, so I'm making it this height and just making sure it's sitting on the bottom of the pencil case. Obviously it doesn't matter if it goes in because we won't be seeing it from the camera. And then let's go to solid mode. Let's round the top first. So and scale is off again because we were in object mode and scaled it. So you'll see here, let's go to object mode, Shift A, apply scale. And once you've done that, select the top face, bevel it down like so. Shade smooth. And yeah, as Adam mentioned, don't forget to save. Thanks for the reminder. I am going to auto smooth this to 60 degrees just so I don't get any artifacts. And let's go back to edit mode. Let's move this up a little bit because I think we'll need more room to create that little clip that sticks out here. So I've just selected the top here, all these faces. If you want to do that quickly, you can either go to wireframe view, select the top faces, or you can select this top face and just do Control plus on your numpad, and that will just increase your selection. And I'm just gonna move that up. Okay, and let's create a loop cut and move that up a little bit. Loop cuts are Control R. So Control R, select one, move it up a little bit so you have this much in height for the clip. And I'm just gonna select one of these faces, either you can decide which one. I'm gonna select this one here, and I'm gonna extrude it out. And then create another loop cut in the middle. Just make sure it goes through that center. And let's do 2 loop cuts horizontally. And then let's scale that on the X or on the Z. So what I did is I just selected 2 loop cuts and then pressed right mouse click or escape, and you're confirming it. And we're just gonna move it up and down. So that's scale SZ. And what I'm trying to do is create a hole in this. So I just want to punch a hole through these 2 faces so that we have a nice clip shape. You can do that manually, but I use the loop tool, so we've enabled that before. If I do select these 2 faces, right click, bridge, and it's just going to bridge the faces you've selected and create that nice hole for you. And then we're just gonna round the corners a bit. Select those 2 edges, round it. Same with this one here. Just do Alt, click on these edges until you've got everything. And then just round it a little bit. And as you're doing that, you'll notice this flickering. That's artifacts happening because of your bevel. I don't mind it too much. I just make sure that it stops flickering, and then I confirm my change. Deleting part, yes, I can do that. So let's go back to this. So what I'm trying to do is punch a hole through these two faces. You want to select these two faces in the center of the pin or of the clip. And I'm just doing right click, loop tools, bridge. And I don't think this is how I created it, but we're just gonna stick with this method. I think it's pretty similar anyways. So once you've done that, we're just gonna round the corners. So select these two edges, top and bottom of the clip. Round that first. And then select the edges of the clip. And I'm just hitting Alt-Shift and selecting these edges. If you modify a 3D model enough, Blender doesn't recognize what the edges are. So if it's something simple like this and you select the edge, it'll select the whole loop. But we've modified this portion a lot, so it's having a hard time trying to select this edge here. So I'm just selecting it manually. So Alt-Shift, click on all these edges until they're all selected. And then I'm just doing Control B to bevel it. And again, you don't want the corners to meet like this. You're gonna have some weird results. Just bevel it slightly, it doesn't really matter because we're gonna be zoomed out most of the time. Okay, and I'm just gonna shift this over to one corner of the pencil case. So that's G to move. And then I'm doing Shift Z. Instead of doing one XY together or separately, I'm just excluding Z from the movement. So that's Shift Z and then moving it over. Okay, I'm gonna do the same thing for the pencil. So that's easier than the highlighter. Let's do Control A, cylinder, make it smaller, and just make it around the same thickness as the highlighter, and also same height as well. And I'm gonna do this in wireframe view, just so I have a better view of what I'm doing. Okay, so I'm gonna make it slightly shorter, and then just making sure that it fits in the pencil case. And then let's go to solid view, shade smooth, and then go to object data properties, auto smooth, 60 degrees. And let's just bevel this edge here. Let's apply the scale. So go to object mode, apply scale. And it's a habit of mine, I tend to change things in object mode and I just need to reset the scale. But as I mentioned before, it's better to just make your changes in edit mode. And then use the bevel tool. I'm decreasing it to 1 cut. And then make that. I do want a tip here, but I want to create a sharper pencil. So I'm just going to move this loop down like so. And then you'll notice there's like the lead portion, the wood portion, and the yellow cover or the paint. So we're just gonna make another loop cut here for the lead when we apply materials. So that's Control R, move it up, and we're gonna leave it like that for now. So we have the two things that sit on your pencil case or sit in it. Yeah, after that, let's do the coffee cup. We might be able to finish modeling all these actually. So let's do this coffee cup first. Shift right click on the desk and another cylinder as well. You can keep these settings. Scale it down. Make sure it's sitting on top of the desk. And then just going back to the reference if you want to see how big it is. Okay, I am happy with this size as a base. You'll notice the cup gets a little wider going towards the top, and then we have the lid that comes out, and then towards the top it goes in. There's a little indent on the top face, so we're gonna do that. Go into edit mode, and just so I have this in view, I'm gonna select and make the top face bigger, and then let's start creating the lid. So extrude it out. We're just gonna extrude it out until the top of that lid, and it's looking a bit high, but let's leave it like that, and then create a loop cut in the middle. And we do want to make that smaller. I think the lid is a bit high. So once you've created that cut, you want to go to face select, number 3 on your keyboard, and then just select this loop here. Control or Alt E, that is the extrude options. You can also right click and extrude here. I want to extrude along the faces, all of these faces. So extrude along normals here. If you just do extrude face, you're just gonna have this weird extrusion. We're gonna do extrude faces along normals, and then just move that out a little. Like so. And another tip here, if I do this and hit S, you'll see a slight tweak, and it seems like when I'm within a tool you don't see the hotkey, but I'm currently pressing S, and what that'll do is create the edges evenly. You won't notice it here, but in some cases, like a cube, if you extrude along normals, you'll need to press S. I think that'll happen in the book actually, so I can explain it in detail, but I usually just press S to make sure it's even along the normals. Let's make this top face smaller. And looking at it now, it seems like the lid is okay. It's a bit short than I expected, so I'm just gonna make it higher. I am gonna select this face and make it smaller. So from here, if you do S, you're scaling it along all 3 axes. So you'll notice it doesn't, like, you'll see a little bit of the top and the bottom face because you're scaling it along all 3. If you wanted to just scale along horizontal axes, then it's S, Shift C, and then you're just kind of putting it back towards where it first got extruded. Okay, once you've done that, let's use the bevel modifier this time. Oh, before we do that, we want to create that dent on the top. So create an inset. So select that top face, I inset a little bit. Doesn't have to be too much actually. And then let's shade smooth. Let's go to object mode, right click, shade smooth, and let's auto smooth this 60 degrees. And the cup is looking big, but we can always scale it down a bit. And let's try applying the bevel modifier. So go back to your modifiers panel, bevel, and I want to make sure it's uniform scale. So in object mode, Control A, scale, and then I think a good number would be 0.01. Okay, we need a much smaller number than that. 0.005. Yeah. And then just increase the segments. Okay, and we get this here. If you go to the top, you'll notice the edges here, which shouldn't matter too much because in the camera view that we're at, you can't really see those edges. It's just gonna look like it's a smooth surface. But there you have it. That's all the desk props. You can change the location of location and rotation of these two because it's slightly different here. But I'll let you do that in your own time. Let's move on to the books. So again, I'm just gonna reposition the 3D cursor. That's shift right click. Mesh cube, or let's start with plane actually. Scale it down. And let's make it longer in height. So I'm just gonna move this one towards the front. So yeah, I've just selected that front edge and then moved it towards the front of the cabinet or the drawer. And then now I'm gonna select this whole plane, extrude it out like this. And it's looking a little bit big, but we'll just keep it like this for now. We're gonna have to create the spine first, so create a loop cut and move it towards the edge here. Maybe somewhere along here. And then let's create 2 loop cuts horizontally. Confirm that. And then let's do SZ. And I do want to make sure we're even along this face here, so I'm just gonna move it to the left a little bit. So this will be our cover and spine. This is the spine area, this is the cover, the back cover. We're just gonna select these 3 faces. So that's gonna make up the paper, like where the paper is, that white section. And we're gonna use extrude faces along normals. So instead of doing it outwards, we're gonna do it inwards. But just to explain that even edge again, if I extrude it out, you'll notice it's not extruding evenly. So when you hit S, that gets fixed. And you won't be able to notice it if you're extruding just a bit, but there is a slight difference. So I always tend to just press S when I extrude along normals. So let's extrude it inwards, like so. And what we're gonna do now is round it a little. I can use the bevel modifier again, but I'm just gonna do it manually. Let's try bevel modifier. Let's go to bevel. I think it might be applied evenly. Yeah, seems like it. So just add modifier bevel, decrease the amount and increase the segment. And I always change the geometry outer to arc. I found that it smooths out these corners here, so do that. And let's just shade smooth. You can tweak the amount later. Right now, I'm just gonna leave it like this. I'm not happy with how this edge it doesn't match this edge here. So I might just go back, remove the bevel and bevel it manually. But let's leave it like this for now. Move it down slightly so it's sitting on top. And then it's looking slightly big for me. I'm just gonna scale it down a bit. And then let's just duplicate this. So Shift D. And I'm just gonna make sure it's moving horizontally along the drawer. And then let's move that one to the right. Let's move this one a little bit forward. And again, I'm using Shift Z when I move, so I don't move it upwards or downwards. And then just gonna rotate it. Same with this one, it's rotated by 90 degrees, so I'm just gonna do that. And then let's do Shift D, move this one up so it's sitting on top. And then just to make a variety here, I'm just gonna rotate it again. And you'll notice it's not rotating anchored to the center because our origin point isn't in the center. So if you wanted to reset that, just hit right click, set origin to geometry, and it should center in the middle of that book. Same with these two. And then you'll notice it starts rotating along the center. Okay, so we have the book. Is anyone falling behind? Okay, I guess not. I am going a little bit slower because it seemed like if you were falling behind. So apologies if it's too slow for you, but we're trying to make it so everyone can follow. Let's go ahead and make that clock. So for this one, we cannot reposition the 3D cursor because there's no plane to anchor it against. Yeah, just making sure we're not missing anything. I think we've covered everything but the clock. So let's do Shift A. Let's do circle. And circle by default doesn't have a face. It just provides you the edge. So we're gonna go into edit mode by hitting tab. Press F to fill. So you'll notice there's a solid that comes into view once you do that. And then go back out. Let's scale it down. And if your object's gonna move in the space, you want to do that in object mode. So I think that's why I'm in object mode most of the time, because there is some movement involved. If you move it in edit mode, you just have to recenter your origin point, which is by right clicking and then origin to geometry. But let's just go back, and I'm gonna move the clock back a little bit. Just imagine if there's like an invisible wall here, and then let's rotate this circle 90 degrees, and let's move it up. And I'm just gonna reference the image so it's roughly in the same position, and then let's scale it up a little bit. Okay, select, let's go into edit mode and set it. Actually, before we do that, let's create some depth first. So Control Z that if you've already made that change. Let's extrude it, E, like so. And then let's inset that top face. Extrude it back in, E. And then inset, we want to get that center point. And then let's extrude that out as well. Okay, now we want to bevel this. This one, we can just use the bevel tool directly. And then let's decrease the amount, increase the segment. If you want more fine controls, so this, when I created this, I mostly beveled everything manually, just because sometimes I want corners, certain corners to be different roundness compared to others. If you apply the bevel, it's just gonna round every edge the same. So if you want finer controls, you're probably better off just manually beveling the edges. But just for the sake of this workshop, we're gonna do it all together. And I do want to increase the, actually let's shade smooth. It's hard to see what's happening here. Shade smooth. Yeah, I think that's looking okay. I'm just gonna maybe move this out a little bit. So this corner or this edge wasn't able to, it didn't have enough room to apply this much of a length to the bevel. So I'm just controlling that, and you'll notice the whole object changes as I do. So if one certain section of your model doesn't have enough room, it's gonna affect your whole model. So just keep that in mind. You'll notice, see, like if I want to create this edge sharper, it's gonna affect your whole object. So that's why I prefer doing manual bevels if I can. Okay, so that's the clock. Oh, actually, we do have some time, so maybe I'll just let's just revert back to, I thought we're heading closer to 11, but we're not. So let's just undo that. Apologies. And just get to the state where you don't have the bevel modifier here, and we'll go ahead and just manually bevel it. Okay, so I'm just gonna bevel, select these three edges, so 1, 2, and 3, by doing Shift or Alt, Shift, Control B, and I want those three to be the same. And I'm just gonna create three faces here. Okay, once you've done that, shade smooth, and you want to auto smooth when you enable shade smooth. Okay, so I think that was faster. We should have done that in the first place. Okay, if everyone is here at this point, I'm going to create the clock hands. I'm just gonna put the 3D cursor here, or maybe I will. So if I do this and Shift S, cursor to selected, it's gonna just land on the top of this face. But we want the hands to actually go inside here, inside this sphere. So what I'm gonna do is select this whole loop in the middle. So select this one, Shift S, cursor to selected, and that's gonna place your cursor inside the sphere. Okay, and once you've done that, let's create a plane, and we'll just create it within the same object. So let's shift rotate it along the X by 90 degrees, RX90 on your numpad, and then scale it down. Scale it along the X again, so you want to keep a nice narrow hand there, and then I'm gonna move it up. And if it's not long enough, you can always like kind of make it move that top edge here. And then once you've done that, if you just want to select one object within the model, just hit L while you're hovering over something, and that'll just select that one object. And then I'm just gonna extrude it out a little bit. Again, it is sticking out slightly. If you wanted to push it back, again, you can hit L while you're hovering over this, but I think it's good for now. And then for this one, I believe I just beveled this corner. So select these two, Control B, just bevel it like so. And then now we don't have to create another object. We can just duplicate it, rotate it around the 3D cursor, and then make it shorter. So hit L while you're hovering over this hand. Shift D to duplicate. And we do want to change the pivot point. Right now it's in the medium point. So that's period on my keyboard, or you can also do it here as I mentioned before. And just select 3D cursor. And now when you rotate it along the Y, it's just gonna rotate as if the clock actually, like this is how the clock hands move. So just rotate it around like so. And then the hour hand is gonna be shorter. So just make sure you select just these top faces. I'm gonna go to wireframe mode and face select, just select these three. Actually, I remember why I chose 3 o'clock instead of 4 or 5. Let's go back and rotate it so it's RY 90 degrees. And I chose 3 because it's easier to move it along the axis to change the length rather than, let's say you made this 4 o'clock. There's no way to decrease the length of this towards the center of the clock because there's no axis to do that against. So that's why 3 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 6 o'clock, that's easier because you have X, Y, Z axis to control it against. But I'm just gonna make that shorter, just like a normal clock, and go back to solid. It's hard to see now, but once we apply color, it's gonna be easier to identify the hands. So that's it for the props. We're gonna add a background, add a camera, maybe a little bit of materials before we end the session. Let's add the background first. So I'm gonna just reset the location of my cursor. That's Shift C, or you can do Shift S and then do cursor to world origin here, and that should take it back to the center. And then let's just add a plane. Increase it, let's say by 4, so S4, or you can just manually increase it to 4 blocks. And then let's select this edge here on the back and hit E, Z, move it up by, let's do move it up by 6. And again, if you made a mistake in your extrude, so let's say I pressed E to extrude it and maybe I entered like a wrong number and I hit enter, or I didn't hit, I hit enter like so. It's too high, I want to undo that change. You want to undo it twice just so you know that there's no duplicate extrusion here. So that's something about extrude tools. You need to make sure that you undo that change completely. Otherwise, you're gonna get some real results later. But I've extruded a bit in height, and I'm just gonna select this edge here, bevel it. So we have a nice curve. Just gonna move this out of the way. And then shade smooth. You shouldn't have to do auto smooth in this case. And then let's add the camera. Shift A, camera. Oh, and for this one, you want to make sure you're in front view, because the camera gets added based on the angle you're looking at the render. So if I add a camera here, it's gonna orient it based on that angle, and I don't want that. I want to orient it from the front first. Camera. So do hit numpad 1 and then add the camera. And right now it's in the ground. We're gonna move it towards the front here. So GY, just gonna move it by 8 blocks. So that's 8. And if you hit minus, that's gonna reverse that direction. And then for this camera, we're also gonna rotate it along the 3D cursor. So numpad 0 is camera view, if you've forgotten. And then RZ, and move it up a little bit. And then it's slightly looking from the left side, so RZ, move it toward the left here, like this. And let's change the resolution, or the the ratio. Let's do 1600 by 1200, so a 3:4 ratio. And then from here, it's just a matter of tweaking the location of your camera. Move it up, move it to the left, make sure it's centered. If you're too far away from your render, then you want to move it closer, hit G to move, and then Z twice. And that's how you can move it closer to the render. And I always tend to do this in camera view, just so it's easier to see what I'm doing in terms of changes. And you'll notice this is it's not covering the whole camera view, so I'm just gonna scale it a bit so it's fully enclosed. And from here, it's just a matter of changing your angle however you want. Just keep in mind that when you change from, let's say you rotated on the Z a little bit and you want to rotate along X, your camera is gonna be tilted slightly. So if you tilt it down or rotate it down, it's not parallel to the ground anymore because you've rotated along the Z axis. So if you wanted to tweak the X or Y, make sure it's facing completely like the front view. So if I'm here, right now I've rotated 14.4 degrees along that Z, so I can just enter that on my keyboard, or you can just reset the rotation by doing Alt R, but then again, it's not going to rotate your location. So what I usually do is I try to keep my camera angles an interval of 15. So right now I've just manually did it with my mouse, but if I had it done in certain intervals, I would be able to make those exact changes with my numpad without manually tweaking it like this. Hopefully that made sense. But I think we're good with this render. We do have a bit of time. I think the texturing portion, I'll just do one object, and then maybe for homework or in your own time you can try texturing all these, adding color to it. You do have the original source files if you wanted to change colors based on that exact hex code, so feel free to do that if you want, or you can also add your own twist to colors. Let's do one. I will change the color of, let's do clock. I think that'll be a good example. So what we're gonna do now is apply the purple first, apply the white on the center, and then do the same thing for the hand and the center sphere there. So let's go to material properties, and then just hit new. I'm gonna name this purple, and when I add a color, I try to make the same shade of purple, like apply that same shade of purple to other objects and not have 3 or 4 different shades of purple. If I do want to differentiate like the keys on this keyboard, for example, I increase the brightness of that purple just so it's in the same shade, but just adding a little bit of differences there. But for now, I'm just going to use one color. So, and for this one, let's go to material preview. So we have a nice preview of that purple. Okay, and then now let's add another color that's white. And we want to apply it to just these inside faces. So we can do shift. Actually, we want to do face select, shift, and select one of these edges, and then just assign it like so. And then if you remember, the hotkey to select one object within multiple is L once you hover over that. So if you remember, this was one model, and then we added a plane and extruded it to create these two. So that's why these are separate from this main object. And then I'm just gonna create a black color here. Black. You wanna name it black or however you want, and I'm just gonna increase or decrease the shade of that. You can go completely black if you want. I'm just gonna go with 33333, and if you've done that, assign, and then you should get a nice clock. Okay, so right now I'm kind of wondering if we should color everything, or like for the next session I do want to move on to the next render, which is the 3D scene that I sent in the announcement channel. We won't be able to color everything here, but I think if I give you a few examples, or this one as the example, and then maybe one more, you'll be able to color the scene all by yourself. I did want to touch upon animation. I'm not going to animate everything, maybe just one object, but that will give you an idea of how it's done. So maybe I can just color one more object. That's easy. Let's do the book here. So select the book, and then let's add that pink color first. New, make that pink, and we're just gonna change the color somewhere in between red and purple here. And let's add one more material. And we have the white color created already. We don't need to create new. Just use this drop down, white, and then you want to assign it to the paper bit there. So this one, this face, and this face, and then assign it to that white. So that's where we're gonna wrap it up in terms of materials. I think you got a good idea of how to do it. If you don't, feel free to ask questions in the render channel. But let's animate something here. Let me play what I've done first, so you get an idea of what it looks like. Not this one. Nope, not this one. This one. Okay. This was the animation I created. Oh, never mind, not this one. Oh, you don't see it. Okay. Sorry. I'm gonna replay that. Hopefully it's smooth on your end. And we did a minimized version of this render. We didn't do like the lamp, the board on the back. But to give you an idea of the basics, maybe I'll animate this table, and then we'll see where we get. I think table should be like we only have time to do one object, and I think table would be good to do. So if you let's look at how it's animating it. So the legs are kind of coming out from the bottom, and then it has this little bounce. I don't know if you see that, but it has a little bounce there. And then the table top is coming out. So it's a flat tabletop at first, and then it kind of scales up and then rotates in the air and then lands back onto the leg. So we'll do that. Let's go back to our render or our Blender file. So let's just isolate the view. So we have these two. After you select the legs and the tabletop, just to hit slash. And when you animate something, you always want to make sure your origin point is where you want it to start. So for example, we had the legs popping up from the ground, right? And if this origin point was on the top of these faces, so let me go to, let me see if I'm just gonna apply this mirror modifier. We have these 4 legs. If I selected these 4 faces on the top, and you don't have to do anything at this point, but let's say I have the origin, here. So if it was up here, when you scale something, it's gonna scale from that point, and that's not what we want. We want it to scale from the bottom, and that's why this origin point was on the ground. And from here, if you scale it, right now we have the option to scale it from 3D cursor or origin point, but you always want to do it from origin point because 3D cursor changes as you keep animating other things. So I tend to just base it off this origin point. And I don't know if we'll have time to follow along on this, but I'll just show you what the basics look like. So if I go back to medium, not medium point, or individual origin, this is where you want to scale it from. So you're scaling it from this ground. And I usually leave a little bit of room at the front for users to, so maybe 30 frames. This is a little bit too fast, but I like it when it starts maybe 1 second or half second later. So I'll try to start from this 30 frame mark, assuming that this animation is 60 frames per second. This is not what we want. We want it to scale from the bottom and just in height. So if I scale it down in height, you'll notice that this value changes. And these are values you want to pay attention to when you're animating. Maybe I'll just animate as I go, and then you'll see how it applies practically to this case. So let me go down to, I don't want to scale it among the X or Y because there's no animation towards that. Let's just move it to 0 on the Z. And if you want to add a frame, and this is, maybe you're not familiar with this, this is a timeline on the bottom, and how it works is similar to After Effects. You have to create a frame for each object and then create another frame to the end state. So the start, create a frame for the start state, create a frame for the end state, and then you just play that, the 2 points, and it'll get to the start and end. So if I had to quickly do that, let's insert a frame for scale here, and then insert a frame for the end state, another scale frame, then it just kind of scales up like this based on these 2 frames. So let me go back to 30 frames. How you add a frame is the hotkey I, and you'll see a bunch of options here. I only use the top 3 and then these here that have a combination of 2 or 3. Right now we're just animating the scale, so I want to insert a scale frame at the 30 mark here, and then let's say I want it to be half a second, and I want it to animate during that half a second. Let's go back to this scale value, and this is where this comes in handy. So let's keep it 110 for now, 110, and then if you wanted to animate half a second, which would be 30 frames per second if it was a 60 frame per second animation, I would change this to 1, which would get it back to the original state. And then you can also hit I here on, like, when you hover over the scale and hit I, it's gonna add a frame for you. So you can do it both ways. You can do animate it, like go to that frame you want it to be at the end state, and then hit I, scale, and this will turn yellow. This will add a frame to your timeline. Or you can just hover over this section and press I. So now if I play that by hitting spacebar, it animates up like so. Grace, how did you get the frames? I got this when I pressed insert key. So when you press I on the timeline, you get different options. You want to press I in your viewport, and then you get those options here. So that's how you animate the leg. And before this, like if you just look at the camera view, you'll see these 4 cylinders, right? And it's a bit awkward. So what I do is I just create 1 frame before this, and I just hide it by zeroing out all the scale values. and then hitting I on that. And once you do, it's just appearing abruptly, which is what we want in this case. Sometimes you want it to appear gradually, like this. But when it comes to, like if I had to gradually animate this, let's say I wanted, if I gradually animate this, it looks weird. And you don't want that. You want it to make it seem like it's just popping out from each individual position. So that's why I'm not adding any animation to the X and Y. I'm just adding one frame for it to disappear, like that. So if I play that, it kind of comes up. And then the speed of this we won't tweak right now because we don't have much time, but that's how you add frames in your timeline. If you wanted to make it faster, obviously you'll have to pull this in a little bit and then it animates faster. And then for the bounce itself, this is more of advanced. We'll have to go to a new panel. Let's go to animation. And if I go to, this is, we covered this in the first session. We haven't used it much, but if I want to change a view to another panel, you just click on this top left icon here. And in this case, we're going to change it to the graph editor. And what this is it's just the representation of how these changes are being animated. So for example, if we had the Z scale in this case, so if I select that object and then in the timeline I select the Z scale, you'll see that graph here in the graph editor. And this is like how drastic it's changing. It's another concept in motion graphics called interpolation. So this is what it is. If I change that interpolation to cubic, or this is, I guess cubic is default, let's do quintic. Oh, actually it's not. I need to select those first. So if you select certain frames, you'll see these, what you see in the pen tool in Figma or Illustrator. So what you're doing is basically changing how drastic it's easing in and out from the start and the end point. So if I change this to a more drastic curve, you'll notice that there's a difference in how it eases. So this one, it kind of like starts out slow, as in the curve here. It starts out slow and then it drastically becomes faster as it progresses towards the end. And if I change this to something like just a normal Bezier, then it's just gonna gradually start and end. And then in the animation, I kind of mentioned that there's a bounce. If you want to achieve that effect, you can use this bounce here, and it'll do like a very drastic bounce, which I don't really prefer sometimes. Like it does this, and I don't want the bounce to be that drastic. What I did for mine is I just maybe we'll go back to linear. So what I did is I went to a little bit further. So this is the end state, and then from that end state I just animated the height slightly, like 1.1 at that keyframe, and then went 5 frames ahead and then went back to 1. So at the end of that animation, you just get a quick bounce like that. I don't know if you see that, but animating, bounce, and then goes back down. So that's what I did for most of the objects in this render. If I go back to it and I press play, you can't see it because of the tabletop, but let's remove that for now. I'm just gonna hide that. Play it, and it does that little bounce at the end. And then obviously you need to tweak the timing based on what your preference is. And then you'll notice these artifacts here at the starting point. I think harden, yeah, this is not applied, that's why. Even so, it doesn't do anything. But when in the preview, I don't think that would affect anything. Yeah, it doesn't look that bad, so just ignore it for now. And it's just like 10 frames where you see that, so it's not going to be noticeable. But have that little bounce, and then let's do the tabletop, and I want to unhide it. So let's isolate these two again. And then I don't want it to happen when the table leg animation ends. I want it to happen where it ends here. So when it first comes out, I want it to seem like it's kicking out the tabletop upwards. So when it goes up and it reaches that point, which is the 50 frame mark here, this is where I want this tabletop animation to start. And how I'm doing this, and I'm just checking if my scale value is 111, because this is the default that I want. This is the end state I want the desk to be in, or the tabletop I want it. So let's add that end state first. I think that's easier. Assuming it starts on 50 and it ends 30 frames later, I'm gonna add it on the 80 mark. So let's add scale. We're gonna animate all three properties: location, rotation, and scale. So I'm just gonna hit this, and then immediately you'll see this yellow, and that means it's added frames for all three properties in your timeline. And then now we just need to edit. We need to animate from the starting point, and I started it as a flat surface like this. So it was 0 on the Y, like so. And you don't have to add properties for everything if you're just tweaking the scale, but I tend to do it just because, like, during the process I tend to forget certain things, and it's just easier if I add all three. And it's kind of hard to explain this right now. Like I'll have to go in depth in animation to explain it, but for now let's just say that if you're tweaking location, rotation, scale for one model, then just add frames for all of them, even though you're only tweaking scale, for example. And then for this one, I want it to disappear abruptly as well, so I'm just going to zero out the scales, and we have this. So now we just need to animate it going upwards, rotating, and then coming back down. So that is a combination of location and rotation. So right now I want it to maybe go to the top, the very top, in the middle of these two frames. So that's the 65 frame mark. So I'm just gonna move that up a little bit, and I'm just gonna create a location frame here, and at the same time I want it to rotate. So let's, if I want it to rotate 360 degrees, it's gonna have to rotate 180 at this top point. So that means I just need to change this to 180, and it's rotating along the bottom of this tabletop, and I don't want that. I want it to rotate along the center of the tabletop. But if you change the origin point midway, I'll show you what happens. So when I do that and I go back to 50 frames, it's slightly lower than before. The tabletop is slightly lower than where it was before, and that's because the origin point started at the bottom, which was flush to the top of these legs. But then when I change the origin point to the center of this tabletop, it just reorients this tabletop to that point, meaning now the table is a little bit lower than what it was before. So this, you'll get to this idea if you keep working on animations. Right now it's kind of hard to explain everything. But let's go ahead and change the rotation on this. So now we've fixed the origin point. We're just gonna make this top point 180 degrees, and then here we want it to be 360, and then just hit I on this. And if we play that, oh, I have rotated the wrong axis, but that I can see someone animating along the Z. That's not what I want though. I want it along the X. So 180 here, and then 360 here. And then if I play that, it kind of does that kick that we wanted. And then from here, you'll have to make some tweaks. Like from this view, it doesn't appear like it's coming below the legs, but from the side view, it's pretty evident that it's coming from below. So maybe you want to tweak the location of this a little bit higher from the starting point. Maybe from here, and then you just apply that frame. It overrides whatever location you had before. So now if I do it, it goes like this. And then I want the scale value to animate before it actually goes to the very top. So what I want to do is go into the breakdown of these properties. So if you go to summary, object transforms, you'll see all the properties here, and I want to animate the scale first. So I want to make this faster. I don't want it to end the scale up at 80 frames. I want it to end where it's at the top point, so here. So now if I play this, it's a little bit smoother. I think the scale value can be a bit faster, maybe 5 more frames faster. Yeah, that looks a little bit better. But obviously if you want to tweak that, you can do so. A little bit, making it too fast, it's gonna bleed into the legs, which is not what you want. So you just want to play it over and over again and make sure that it's looking okay. It does seem a little low, so I'm just gonna make it higher. Apply that by hitting I on this, and if I do it again, and just like in real life, if this had to land on a surface from high above, it would do a little bounce. So let's add that at the end. I'm just gonna add a bit of a bounce, and then go to 90 frames, bring it back. If you want it in the same location, you can just copy this and go to 90 frames, paste it, hit I, and it's gonna go there. Or you can just copy these 3 frames to frame 90. So if I play that, it's just a little bounce there. And obviously you can tweak that if you want, but yeah, you'll see a little bit of bleeding into the bottom here. So you can either make this higher or make it animate along with the scale, so it kind of goes faster. But the problem with that, it'll land slower than it rises fast. Like it rises faster and then it lands slower. So that's a problem. You'll have to tweak this based on what you think looks right. And I remember when I was playing it, animating this scene, I had to play this multiple times just to get it right. But that is the basics of animation. For this workshop, we don't have any animation planned. This was just something that came up, and I thought it would be good to show you. How did I learn these kind of animations? I think I just went to YouTube and I searched Blender animation, watched a bunch of videos, and that's how I learned. I didn't come across a course where it taught me all of these in one video. So maybe that's another session that we can do in a future workshop. but for this one we won't be covering too much animation. I would recommend going to YouTube if you want to learn about timeline, searching specifically on the timeline. So you would search like Blender animation timeline. If you wanted to learn about interpolation, you would do Blender interpolation, and that would be a search term. But otherwise it's very broken up, and you just have to kind of fit the pieces yourself. If you need to ask any specific questions, feel free to ask in this channel. I'll try to answer them as much as I can. But yeah, that is the basics of animation. For next week, maybe you can color it yourself, share it in the render channel, and we can wrap this render up for this workshop. The next one we'll be covering is the 3D scene that I've done a while back, and that is this one. We'll be doing this one here without the characters. So I'll share the image reference and the file in advance, so you have those up front before we start. But yeah, I think we can end it here today. Anyone have questions or comments? Feel free to post them in the channel, but otherwise, thanks for coming, and I'll see you next week. Arctic, thanks for coming. This is a Twitch viewer. Yeah, I've just started doing workshops and tutorials, so feel free to join future sessions. Okay, awesome. See you next week.